On a summer morning in 1914, a 19-year-old Slav nationalist stepped up to an open car and fired a pistol. That single trigger pull ignited a chain reaction that would burn down the old world. The victim was Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the heir to the fragile Austro-Hungarian Empire. The assassination took place in the streets of Sarajevo, a volatile city in the Balkans that had long been a focal point of regional rivalries. Within weeks, a complex web of defensive treaties dragged all of Europe into the crisis. When Austro-Hungary declared war on Serbia, Russia mobilized to defend its ally. Germany then backed Austro-Hungary, declaring war on both Russia and France. The leaders of these empires actually welcomed the conflict. Germany's Kaiser Wilhelm II and his generals viewed a clash with their neighbors as inevitable, and they were entirely confident it would result in a swift, easily won victory. That absolute certainty trickled down to the ranks. Millions of men marched off to the front lines in the autumn of 1914, assured by their commanders that they would return home as heroes before Christmas. But these armies were marching into a buzzsaw. They brought 19th century battlefield tactics to a 20th century war, charging in bright uniforms against mass-produced machine guns and rapid-fire artillery. The slaughter was immediate. Germany's grand strategy, the Schlieffen Plan, was designed to quickly encircle and destroy the French army before turning east. But the offensive stalled outside Paris. Instead of a rapid victory, Germany found itself trapped in a grinding two-front war against both France and Russia. The situation in the east was just as chaotic. Russian forces launched an early invasion of East Prussia, but they blundered directly into a trap at the Battle of Tannenberg. The Russian military suffered an absolute catastrophe. An entire army was obliterated, and 90,000 Russian soldiers were taken prisoner in a matter of days. Meanwhile, the Western Front had completely frozen. To survive the deadly hail of modern firepower, both sides dug into the earth. A continuous 350-mile network of defensive trenches soon stretched from the English Channel to the Swiss border. Desperate to break this European deadlock, the Allies looked for a vulnerable backdoor. They launched a massive naval and ground invasion against the Ottoman Empire at Gallipoli, hoping to threaten the Turkish capital and open a sea route to Russia. The operation was a spectacular failure. Allied troops met fierce Turkish resistance right on the beaches and were immediately pinned down. After months of brutal fighting and 250,000 casualties on each side, the Allies secretly evacuated. The illusion of a glorious, sweeping adventure had evaporated entirely. The major powers were completely paralyzed, locked in a mechanized stalemate, where defensive firepower easily outmatched any offensive tactic they could devise. By 1916, military commanders accepted a grim reality. Unable to capture meaningful territory, they shifted to a strategy of pure attrition. The objective was no longer to take ground, but simply to kill the enemy until their nation ran out of young men. Germany put this theory to the test by launching a massive assault on the French fortress town of Verdun. The German High Command explicitly designed the battle as a mincing machine, aiming to bleed the French army white by forcing them to defend the symbolic city at any cost. The resulting artillery barrages were so intense, they physically erased hillsides and forests. Millions of shells pounded the landscape into a lunar wasteland, obliterating infrastructure and wiping out entire infantry divisions almost as fast as they arrived. To relieve the unbearable pressure on the French at Verdun, the British and French armies launched their own massive joint offensive further north, at the River Somme. The British command believed a week-long artillery bombardment had destroyed the German defenses. They were wrong. As waves of British infantry walked upright into no man's land, they were cut down by heavy machine gun fire, suffering 57,000 casualties in just the first few hours. Human lives were no longer treated as tactical assets. They were raw material being fed into an unfeeling mechanical war, consumed by the millions to gain mere yards of mud. The sheer weight of these immense losses began to crack the foundations of the old empires. By 1917, after suffering millions of casualties and facing severe food shortages, the Russian populace reached a breaking point, sparking riots and revolution. Tsar Nicholas II was forced to abdicate the throne, severing a centuries-old dynasty. The The subsequent political upheaval ultimately knocked Russia completely out of the war, freeing up massive numbers of German troops in the east. Seeing a narrow window to end the conflict, Germany took a desperate, calculated gamble. They resumed unrestricted submarine warfare, using U-boats to sink neutral merchant ships in an attempt to starve Britain into submission. The plan backfired spectacularly. The sinking of American ships outraged the public and forced U.S. President Woodrow Wilson to abandon his strict stance of isolationism. In April 1917, the United States officially declared war on Germany. The conflict was now a terrifying race against the clock. Germany had to launch a massive, decisive blow on the Western Front and secure total victory before the overwhelming resources and fresh manpower of the American military could reach Europe. With 500,000 troops newly freed from the Russian front, German General Erich Ludendorff launched an all-out spring offensive. Utilizing rapid new infiltration tactics, German stormtroopers broke the stalemate and pushed violently toward Paris. But the rapid advance exhausted the German supply lines. At the River Marne, they were finally stopped by French and British forces, who were now heavily reinforced by 1 million fresh American soldiers entering the fight. The momentum swung permanently. The Allies launched their 100 Days Offensive, coordinating tanks, aircraft, and artillery to smash through the reinforced German defenses. Exhausted, hungry, and severely demoralized, the German army was forced into full retreat. The aura of German military invincibility was completely shattered. Realizing the situation was hopeless, the remaining Central Powers, Bulgaria, the Ottoman Empire, and finally Austria-Hungary, began a rapid domino-style collapse, signing armistices one after the other. Finally, at 11 a.m. on November 11, 1918, the guns fell silent. Exhausted populations poured into the streets of Allied cities, celebrating the end of 4 grueling years of bloodshed. The final toll of the conflict was almost impossible to comprehend. 9.5 million soldiers were dead, 21 million more were wounded, and an estimated 7 million civilians had lost their lives. Months later, the victorious nations gathered at the Paris Peace Conference to dictate the shape of the new world. Inside the Palace of Versailles, they drafted a settlement that would leave a lasting scar on Europe. The Treaty of Versailles imposed brutally harsh conditions on Germany. Its military was heavily restricted, it was forced to pay massive financial reparations, and it had to accept full responsibility for the war in a deeply humiliating guilt clause. The old geopolitical order was dismantled entirely. The vast Austro-Hungarian and Ottoman empires were carved up, drawing volatile new boundaries across Europe and the Middle East. The armistice of 1918 did not resolve the tensions that started the war. It simply put the violence on pause. By crushing the defeated nations with punitive terms, the victors planted bitter resentments in the ruins of Europe. Just 2 decades later, those embers would ignite a second, even more devastating global inferno.